Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Most of the time, when someone gets fired from a broadcasting role in the middle of the season or is forced to resign, it's because they said or did something stupid or offensive. You have the Rush Limbaugh disaster on ESPN with Sunday NFL Countdown. You have Cincinnati Reds announcer Tom Brenneman, who after some horribly offensive comments, delivered what might be one of the funniest moments in the history of baseball and the funniest apology of all time. This clip never gets old. And there are plenty of other examples of people doing this. Usually, you're not getting fired in the middle of the season just for being bad at your job. You're not getting replaced midway through the year simply because you're not very good. Partly because it's tough to make a change like that in the middle of the year, and partly because contracts exist. But in 1998, that's exactly what happened. This is George Seifert, the former head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. And while most people remember him today as a two-time Super Bowl champion head coach, what you might not know, or what you might have forgotten, was that for 1 year, he was a studio analyst on the NFL Today on CBS. And the result was so bad and so disastrous that he was, for all intents and purposes, fired in the middle of the season. This is the story behind the biggest broadcast disaster in the near half-century-long history of the iconic pregame show. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand who George Seifert is, how he was viewed in the NFL community, and why he was hired to take on this position in the first place. Oddly enough, this is not the first video I've done on Seifert, as I talked about how he got his coaching start in a previous video of mine, and how it almost happened with the Cleveland Browns. To learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. Long story short, in 1989, while he was en route to interview with the Browns for their vacant position, his plane to Cleveland had to make a pit stop due to inclement weather. While there, and while letting his wife know about the weather delaying his plans, his wife informed him that there was now an opening in San Francisco because Bill Walsh was retiring, and they wanted Seifert, who had been the defensive coordinator there for the past 6 seasons and was viewed for a while as their successor, to take the job. With that, Seifert flew back and took the Niners' position. And I think it's safe to say that while Seifert was no Bill Walsh, he was still a really solid head coach that knew what he was doing with that team, and led the team to success. In 1989, Seifert became the second head coach in the history of the NFL, and the first since Don McCafferty in 1970 to win the Super Bowl in his first season with the team. He led San Francisco to a 14-2 record, and led the Niners on arguably the most dominant playoff run of all time, as they outscored their opponents by 100 points in their 3 playoff games. You could make a legitimate argument for the 1989 49ers being the greatest team of all time. And in all 8 seasons that Seifert spent in San Francisco, the Niners were one of the best teams in football. All 8 seasons, the Niners had double-digit wins. They made it to the postseason 7 times, they won the NFC West 6 times, and they made it to the NFC Championship game 4 times. Over those 8 years, the Niners went 98-30, winning an astonishing 76% of the games. To put how absurd that number is into perspective, if Seifert coached 1 more season and the Niners went 12-4, his winning percentage would go down. And of course, he won 2 Super Bowls, as he led the Niners to victory at Super Bowl 29. By the time he resigned after the 1996 season under some bizarre circumstances, Seifert was held in high regards. Now it was time for the next chapter in his life. And after a year away from the game, he would find that something else in broadcasting. In 1998, after 4 years without football, CBS was able to reacquire its rights to broadcast NFL games, as this time they were able to successfully outbid NBC for the AFC package. And one of their first orders of business was to figure out who to bring onto their pregame show for the revival of the NFL Today. I talked a lot about the history of the NFL Today in previous videos, so if you want to learn more about that, then click the card in the upper right corner. However, with the exception of Jim Nantz, who was the studio host and was the man running the ship on the air, CBS made the bizarre decision to hire 3 analysts with no experience whatsoever. They hired 3 first-timers, which is something that not even Fox did when they got the rights, as they at least hired Terry Bradshaw, who did 4 years on the NFL Today. Much like Fox did with the hiring of Terry Bradshaw, Howie Long, and Jimmy Johnson, CBS decided to copy the formula of having 2 former players and 1 former coach on the panel. On the players' side, they went with former San Francisco 49ers tight end Brent Jones, who made 4 Pro Bowls and was one of the best tight ends of the 1990s. And they went with Marcus Allen, one of the greatest running backs in the history of the sport, and a man who would eventually find his way into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And on the coach side, they decided to hire Seifert. Now don't get me wrong, Seifert was a very good head coach. However, this decision immediately raised eyebrows from a ton of people considering his rather reserved demeanor. People were skeptical as to whether or not Seifert's calm, quiet demeanor would translate well to television. And Seifert didn't exactly do a whole lot before the show went on the air to silence the critics. Every interview with Seifert talked about how nervous he was, but it didn't seem like the good kind of nerves or the general nerves that people get no matter how many times they go on the air. They were actual nerves. It was very concerning. Seifert made promises to change his entire persona, saying if I sit around the studio with a sour look, I won't last until the second half hour, and adding, I'm very nervous. Scared would be the right word. A week later, he reiterated the same thoughts, saying it scares the hell out of me. While he was excited about it, he never seemed comfortable, saying I don't think there's anything wrong with putting yourself in a threatening position every now and then in your life. If a studio show in a scripted environment where a football coach gets to talk about football is a threatening position, that's saying something. And if that wasn't enough, he later said, sometimes you say, God, what did I get myself into? I find myself getting nervous and needing a walk. Oh boy, that's not good. This was always going to be a challenge for Seifert, especially since he was surrounded by all rookie analysts and since it went against his entire persona. To the surprise of very few people, it did not go well. When CBS brought back the NFL Today, everyone knew that the show, especially with this rookie lineup, was going to be heavily scrutinized. Fox executive producer Ed Goren said that it was going to be a huge challenge to get into a rhythm with three guys who had never been in that environment before. And Nantz said that he expected people to watch the show with close eyes and look at it with high scrutiny, saying, I know it's going to be scrutinized. I know people are going to pick it apart. I realize that the media have a job to do. And man, did they pick it apart. While everyone not named Nantz received a heavy brunt of the criticism, because Nantz was the consummate professional who was the equivalent of an MVP baseball player on a team that finishes the season with 100 losses, the man who received the most criticism was Seifert. Before I talk about why exactly he was bad, I have to point out this other interview he had when he talked about how he was preparing for the job after spending a year away from the sport not even watching it in any capacity. And he said that he was preparing for the job by consulting with and talking to no one. He said he talked to none of the other coaches turned broadcasters, guys like John Madden and Jimmy Johnson, who were extremely successful in their transitions, yet he wasn't talking to them. He didn't need anyone's advice, saying that he wanted to just be himself. It's the equivalent of the Jerry Rice-AJ Jenkins workout controversy from 2012, where Rice, the greatest receiver to ever play the sport, offered to train AJ Jenkins, and it never wound up happening. And man, Seifert could have used some help, because he was absolutely terrible. Seifert struggled in two ways. Either he was incredibly boring and said nothing, just looking uncomfortable and antsy the whole time, or he offered nothing of value, had no idea what to say, or had no idea when to say it. Fortunately, we have some clips that exemplify this. Keep in mind that everything you're about to see is just from one show, and all these clips came within 10 minutes of each other, not even. I feel like this is the best way to do it just to show how painful it was to have Seifert back there, and how ill-prepared and poorly suited he was for this. Because I would be here all day, no exaggeration, if I showed every single instance and every single clip of Seifert just not being that good at this job. Let's roll the tape. After the Jacksonville Jaguars knocked off the Chicago Bears in a close contest that was decided within the final 30 seconds, Seifert was asked by Nantz about the performance. This is what Seifert had to say.
But the Bears, with just such an upstart performance here today, George, that many really didn't expect.
No, that's for sure. And this often happens. We're a team that's heavily favored to go into a stadium, especially early in the season. Chicago's fired up. Everybody's ready to go. They put forth a great performance, and all of a sudden here comes Jaguars right back taking control of the ball game.
I have no idea where that sentence was going. None whatsoever. Don't you love it when a heavily favored road team goes into a stadium, the home team shows up, and then the road team wins? Every part of that was just uncomfortable to listen to. Later on, he's doing highlights for the game between the Seahawks and the Eagles, and as Joey Galloway catches a touchdown pass, take a listen to what Seifert says.
Fumbled. Warren Moon didn't take long here, did he, Coach?
No, not all. He hooks up, beats Troy Vincent, hooks up with Bobby Galloway, touchdown. They do it later on in the game as well.
Yeah, that's not his name. I don't even know how you get Bobby Galloway out of that. And it'd be one thing if messing up the name was for a player that came out of nowhere or had a very similar sounding name to someone else, but Galloway was a first-round pick with over 1,000 yards receiving the year before and 12 touchdowns. He was one of the better-known receivers in football. Calling him Joey Galloway should be second nature. And then, 2 minutes later, when Nantz is trying to read off the score of the Lions-Packers game, Seifert interrupts him to say something that everyone had moved on from by that point.
Into the end zone.
It shows the competitive spirit of the Green Bay special teams.
Barry Sanders held under 100 yards, 70 yards in all today.
And then, if that wasn't bad enough, 2 minutes later, Seifert completely has no idea what to say, leading to this incredibly awkward moment and uncomfortable silence.
Feisty performance by the Bears today, the biggest underdogs today going in week one, but the Jaguars pull it out at Soldier Field.
Yeah. So somehow, some way, they figured out a way to win the football game.
It was really bad. All four of these things came within about 8 minutes of each other, and represented more than half the time that Seifert spoke, because he spoke the least of the analysts. He was already uncomfortable trying to fit in, And then when he did try and fit in by opening his mouth, it wasn't good. It was borderline disastrous. And as the season went on, the experiment did not get any better. Seifert was continuing to struggle. The chemistry between he and Jones and Allen never really got any better. The show was doing terribly in the ratings, continuously being behind Fox, and drawing significantly worse numbers than what NBC was pulling the year before when they held the AFC package. And things got so bad that before the season ended, CBS decided that it was time to pull the plug. On December 13, 1998, CBS did an edition of the NFL Today for Week 15 of the season. But instead of their usual lineup that had been there all season, with Seifert, Allen, and Jones as the analysts, one man was mysteriously missing. And that was George Seifert, who was pretty much fired. He was doing such a poor job that CBS decided that it would be better to not have him on the show at all. Now, it should be noted that there were rumors about Seifert getting back into coaching in 1999, and CBS fully expected this. Seifert was a hot name after having double-digit wins every season with the 49ers, and CBS even wrote into his contract that Seifert could leave after 1 year to accept a head coaching job elsewhere. But here's the thing, that had nothing whatsoever to do with Seifert not being there. That same season, CBS had Lou Holtz as an analyst for college football, and he stayed with CBS right up until the moment he accepted the job at South Carolina. It was announced on Friday, December 4th that Holtz was taking the job at South Carolina, and he was working for CBS that weekend. CBS doesn't bench or sideline analysts for being involved in coaching talks, or for taking other jobs. If you get one of these jobs, you get to stay as long as you want, and you have to leave on your own terms. The network will not force you out. And yet, Seifert was so bad at his job that that's exactly what they did. Leslie Ann Wade, a spokesperson for CBS Sports, said this is unusual, but everybody's goal is to work to put on the best show there is, reaffirming the fact that this was all CBS's call to remove Seifert from the program. Seifert was just so bad, so lifeless, and so dull in the program that CBS felt that they had no choice but to pull the plug and end the experiment in the middle of the season. Again, the first season of the revival of the NFL Today was a disaster. I think a lot of people saw the disaster coming from a mile away. But I don't think anyone thought that it'd be so bad that one of their analysts and that one of the men that they were banking on would be fired in the middle of the season. So what was the only thing worse than Seifert's stint with the NFL Today? His stint in Carolina. George Seifert holds the distinction of probably being the only person in the history of the NFL to play or coach himself out of the Hall of Fame. I have no doubt in my mind that if he stayed retired, that he would be in canon right now. But after that stint with Carolina, all of the critics that said that all Seifert did was ride off of Bill Walsh's coattails and the team he had were amplified. Because man, that stint with the Panthers was a disaster. In his 3 seasons in Carolina, he never finished above 500. The team declined every year, going 8-8 in 1999, then 7-9 in 2000, and then going an abysmal 1-15 in 2001, making it the worst season in franchise history. In Carolina, Seifert went 16-32, finishing with more losses in those 3 years than he had in his 8 years with the 49ers. When Seifert was fired from Carolina, he would not return to broadcasting in a studio show, to the shock of absolutely no one. As for the NFL Today, the entire show got retooled after the 1998 season. Jim Nantz stayed on as the studio host because he was the only saving grace, but everyone else was replaced. Brent Jones and Marcus Allen would not be retained for the 1999 season, and the show would feature 3 new analysts with Craig James, Randy Cross, and Jerry Glanville. I don't think anyone was surprised that CBS decided, in essence, to just start from scratch after how disastrous that 1998 season was. And perhaps none of the disasters were bigger and more prominent than Seifert. Look, there were so many red flags and warning signs with Seifert that I don't know how CBS didn't see this one coming. Seifert said during that offseason that even though he had no experience whatsoever in a role like this, he was not going to confer with and talk to other coaches who made the transition to television. He said that he was worried about looking glazed and not smiling, which are things that should be second nature to anyone taking on that role. But today, Seifert holds the distinction of being the only person in the half-century-long history of the NFL Today to be replaced and fired in the middle of the season. And it wasn't because he was offensive. It was because he was just offensively bad. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed out to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60 Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.